The strange thing about heartbreak is that it does not always arrive with shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it arrives dressed in a black evening gown, holding a champagne glass, standing just beyond a doorway while the man she loves destroys her world with one careless sentence. Amara Okoro remembered the exact moment because everything about that night had seemed perfect until then. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers. Soft gold light spilled across polished marble floors. A string quartet played near the grand staircase while the skyline of Seoul glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside the hotel, black SUVs lined the private entrance. Men in dark suits stood silently beside them, earpieces glowing faintly beneath the rain. Everyone in Seoul knew Jinwoo Kang. Publicly, he was the owner of Kang Global Courier, one of the most powerful logistics companies in Asia. Privately, people whispered other things, that his delivery trucks carried more than packages, that politicians returned his calls in seconds, that men who betrayed him disappeared from business deals, from cities, sometimes from memory. But to Amara, he was simply her husband, or at least she had wanted to believe that. That night, she had stepped away from the charity gala to find him. The auction was about to begin, and several guests were asking for Mr. Kang. As she approached the private lounge, she heard laughter. Familiar voices, business partners, security chiefs, powerful men who always lowered their tone whenever Jinwoo entered a room. Amara was about to knock when someone inside asked casually, "What would you do if Amara ever left you?" The room laughed. Amara froze with her hand near the door. She expected Jinwoo to dismiss the question. Maybe say she won't. Maybe laugh coldly. Maybe say his wife was not something to joke about. Instead, there was a pause. Then Jinwoo answered calmly. If Amara left tomorrow, life would go on. The sentence landed softly. That was what made it hurt more. No anger, no emotion, no hesitation, just certainty. Life would go on. Someone chuckled nervously. Another man changed the subject. But Amara heard nothing else. For 3 years, she had rearranged her life around Jinwoo Kang. She had moved to Seoul for him, learned how to smile through rooms where people stared at her like she did not belong, sat alone through dinners while he disappeared into late-night meetings, defended him when others called him dangerous, loved him even when loving him felt like standing outside a locked door. And apparently, if she vanished tomorrow, life would simply continue. Amara wanted to walk into that room and ask if he truly meant it, but something stopped her. Maybe pride, maybe heartbreak, maybe the quiet realization that if she had to ask, she already knew the answer. So she stepped back silently. No one noticed, no one followed. The music from the ballroom drifted through the hallway as she forced herself to smile for guests, pose for photographs, and play the role everyone expected. Mrs. Kang, beautiful, composed, untouchable. But inside something had changed, something final. And while Jinwoo Kang continued enjoying the evening, completely unaware of what had happened, Amara made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Amara woke before sunrise. The digital clock beside the bed showed 5:17 a.m. Jinwoo slept beside her, one arm resting across the expensive sheets. In the pale morning light, he looked younger, less like the cold man who controlled warehouses, ports, shipping routes, and men with guns. Less like the man whose sentence had followed her home like a shadow. 3 years ago, she would have reached for his hand. That morning, she simply stared at him and wondered how long she had been lying beside a stranger. She slipped out of bed and went downstairs. The mansion was too quiet before dawn, too large. Too perfect: marble floors, glass walls, black furniture, gold accents. A house designed to impress strangers, not comfort the woman who lived inside it. In the kitchen, she made coffee and stood by the window. Seoul was waking, slowly beneath gray morning clouds. Delivery trucks moved through the streets. Office towers blinked awake. Somewhere far below, one of Jinwoo's Black Kang Global Courier vans passed through the gate. Life was going on. The thought made her chest tighten. Jinwoo came downstairs nearly an hour later. He wore a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, his black hair still damp from the shower. A dragon tattoo disappeared beneath his collar, the ink climbing slightly along the side of his neck. "Morning," he said, already looking at his phone. "Morning." He kissed her cheek without looking at her. It was automatic, a habit, the kind of gesture people perform when love has turned into routine. He poured coffee and began talking about a port inspection, a meeting with customs officials, and a dinner with investors later that week. He spoke while scrolling through messages, spoke while answering a call in Korean, spoke while checking his schedule. Halfway through, Amara realized he had not looked directly at her once. Not once. And somehow that hurt more than the sentence from the night before. The days that followed became strangely clear. Nothing changed on the outside. They attended dinners, smiled at events, stood beside each other in photographs. Jinwoo's hand rested on her waist in public like a mark of possession, but at home his attention belonged to glowing screens, whispered calls, and men waiting outside in black cars. Amara started noticing things she had ignored before. The empty chair across from her at dinner, the unread books she bought while waiting for him, the trips they postponed, the anniversaries interrupted by urgent deliveries, the nights he came home smelling faintly of rain, smoke, and danger. Once, months earlier, she had asked him, "Are you in danger?" Jinwoo had looked at her for a long time before answering, "The less you know, the safer you are." Back then, she thought it was protection. Now she wondered if it was distance. One afternoon, Amara opened an old storage box in her private room. Inside were photographs from the first year of their marriage. Jinwoo smiling without a phone in his hand. Jinwoo standing beside her at a small beach cafe in Busan. Jinwoo laughing as she painted a streak of blue across his wrist. Jinwoo looking at her like she was the only person in the world who could reach him. She sat on the floor for almost an hour, holding those pictures, trying to remember when she had started becoming invisible. That night, Jinwoo returned home after midnight. Amara heard his footsteps pause outside her door. For one fragile second, she thought he might enter, ask what she was doing, see the photographs scattered across the floor, notice her. But after a moment, his footsteps continued down the hall. And as the sound faded, a quiet realization settled over her. The most dangerous part of losing someone is not when they walk away. It is when they stop believing you would notice if they did. People think disappearing begins with packing a suitcase. They are wrong. It begins much earlier. It begins when you stop expecting someone to notice your absence. Over the next week, Amara stopped waiting for Jinwoo. She stopped asking when he would be home, stopped sending messages asking if he had eaten, stopped rearranging her evenings around his emergencies. At first, he did not notice. One rainy Thursday afternoon, she drove into the city alone. Years before marrying Jinwoo, Amara had dreamed of opening an art studio, a warm space filled with sunlight, music, paint, and people trying to rebuild parts of themselves they had lost. Before Seoul, before the mansion, before Mrs. Kang. She had once rented a small space above a bookstore in Itaewon. After the wedding, she told herself she would return to it someday. Someday became 3 years. But that afternoon, as rain slid in the windshield and the city blurred around her, Amara parked outside the old building. The landlord recognized her immediately. "Amara Okoro," he said warmly. "You disappeared," she smiled sadly. "Yes," she said. "I think I did. The studio was still available." Smaller than she remembered, dusty, imperfect. Ordinary, but sunlight still poured through the tall windows. The wooden floor still creaked beneath her steps. And for the first time in years, Amara felt like she was standing inside her own life again. That evening, she returned home with papers tucked inside her purse. Jinwoo was in his office, surrounded by monitors showing maps, routes, ports, warehouses, and cargo movements. To the world, Kang Global Courier delivered packages. But Amara had lived long enough beside Jinwoo to know the maps on those screens were not just business. Men did not fear a courier company, they feared what moved beneath it. She stood in the doorway, waiting. Maybe he would look up, maybe he would ask about her day. Maybe he would notice the excitement in her eyes. Instead, he kept typing. "Everything okay?" he asked without lifting his gaze. Amara looked at him. "Yes," she replied quietly, "everything is fine, fine." Such a small word for something quietly breaking apart. That night, she opened a fresh notebook and began writing. Not a goodbye letter, not yet. Just a list. Things she wanted, places she wanted to visit, dreams she had abandoned. The list grew longer than expected. When she finally looked up, nearly 2 hours had passed. Downstairs, Jinwoo's voice drifted through the mansion as he spoke Korean into his phone. Calm, controlled, dangerous, the same voice that could silence powerful men. The same voice that once made her feel chosen. Amara closed the notebook. For the first time in years, she was not imagining a future built around Jinwoo Kang. She was imagining one built around herself, and somehow that felt both terrifying and freeing. 2 weeks after the gala, Amara stopped waiting for signs that Jinwoo would notice. First, that realization hurt, then it became freedom. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she returned to the little studio above the bookstore. She signed the lease. The keys felt cool in her palm, small, ordinary. Yet holding them felt more powerful than any diamond Jinwoo had ever given her. Slowly, the space began transforming. Fresh paint covered the walls, shelves appeared. Canvases leaned against corners. Sunlight warmed the wooden floors. And every time Amara unlocked the door, she felt another piece of herself return. Meanwhile, the mansion continued as before. Jinwoo worked. His phone rang. His men came and went. Black cars arrived at strange hours. Assistants carried folders through the halls. Sometimes he and Amara passed each other like polite strangers living in the same expensive hotel. One evening, he came home earlier than usual. Amara sat in the library, reviewing paperwork for the studio when he entered with 2 glasses of wine. The gesture surprised her. He handed her one and sat across from her. "You have been quiet lately," he said. Amara almost laughed. "Quiet lately." As if the silence had appeared overnight. As if it had not been growing between them for years. "Maybe I have just been thinking," she said. Jinwoo watched her. "About what?" Amara looked at him. This was the moment, a doorway, an opportunity. If he truly wanted to know, she would tell him everything. The loneliness, the disappointment, the dreams she buried, the sentence she could not forget. But before she could speak, his phone vibrated. Jinwoo glanced down, once then again. Then his expression changed. The husband disappeared. The boss returned. "I am sorry," he said, already standing. "This cannot wait," and just like that, the doorway closed. Amara sat alone in the library, holding a glass of wine neither of them had touched. Strangely, she did not cry. She simply opened her notebook later that night and wrote one new line. "Find an apartment." The word stared back at her, simple, direct, real. Over the next several days, Amara moved quietly. She met with an agent. Opened a private account using money she had earned before her marriage. Sorted documents. Packed small things, family photographs, sketchbooks, a few books, old jewelry from her mother. Pieces of herself that did not belong to the mansion. Nobody noticed. Not the staff. Not Jinwoo's assistants. Not even Jinwoo. Every step felt surreal. Like walking through a dream where only she knew the ending. One Friday evening, while organizing old files, Amara found their wedding album. Dust covered the box. She opened it slowly. There they were, smiling, laughing, looking at each other as though nothing else existed. Her fingers stopped on one photograph. Jinwoo's eyes were fixed completely on her. The expression on his face was impossible to misunderstand. Once, she had been the center of his world. The question that haunted her was not what changed. The question was whether he even realized he had let her drift away. The morning Amara left did not feel dramatic. No storm, no argument, no final confrontation. The sky above Seoul was soft gold as the sun rose behind the towers. Jinwoo slept beside her, exactly as he had countless mornings before. For a long moment, Amara sat at the edge of the bed and looked at him, the face she loved. The man she no longer knew how to reach. She waited for some overwhelming emotion to stop her. A sign, a reason, anything, but all she felt was quiet sadness, not because she was leaving. Because she had stayed so long hoping things would change. Downstairs, the mansion was silent. She walked through each room one last time. The dining room where she had eaten alone. The library where conversations had died before they began. The terrace where she and Jinwoo once talked about having children, traveling, growing old somewhere peaceful. Every room held memories, some beautiful, some painful, all unfinished. In the kitchen, Amara placed a single envelope on the marble counter. Beside it, she removed her wedding ring. The diamond caught the morning light before resting against the white surface. 3 years of marriage reduced to a small circle of gold and a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled, then she turned away. The drive across Seoul felt strangely peaceful. Traffic was light, the city was beginning to wake. Delivery bikes moved through narrow streets. Courier vans pulled up beside office buildings. People hurried toward coffee shops and train stations. Life continued exactly as it always had. But for the first time in years, Amara did not feel trapped inside it. When she reached her new apartment above the studio, she carried the last box upstairs herself. The space was modest, one bedroom, exposed brick, hardwood floors, large windows overlooking the street. Nothing like the mansion. Yet standing there surrounded by sunlight and possibility, Amara felt lighter than she had in years. Around 9 o'clock, her phone began vibrating. Once, twice, then again Jinwoo. She stared at his name on the screen. She knew exactly what had happened. He had woken up, walked downstairs, seen the ring, found the letter. Her chest tightened, but she did not answer. A voicemail appeared, then another, then a third. Amara sat beside the window as the city moved beneath her. Finally, she opened a copy of the letter she had written days earlier and reread the final sentence. The same sentence Jinwoo would be reading at that exact moment. 4 simple words. Now life goes on. People imagine heartbreak as something loud. They imagine shattered glass, raised voices, dramatic endings. The truth is much quieter. Sometimes heartbreak sounds like an empty house. 3 days after Amara left, she finally listened to one of Jinwoo's voicemails. His voice filled the small apartment. First, he sounded confused. "Amara, call me." The second message came 2 hours later. "I do not understand what is happening." By the third, something had changed. The confidence was gone. "Please answer your phone." Amara deleted none of them. She placed the phone face down beside her and stared out the window. Meanwhile, life inside the mansion was unfolding without her. At least, that was what Jinwoo had always believed would happen. Later, she would learn how wrong he had been. The first morning after she left, he skipped breakfast. The second morning, he asked the housekeeper if anyone had heard from her. By the third day, he came home earlier than usual. By the fifth, he started walking through rooms he rarely entered. The library, the terrace, the garden. Places that suddenly felt different, though he did not understand why. Amara knew none of this. Her own life was beginning again. The studio opened quietly. A few students came during the first week. A retired teacher, a university student, a young mother. A lonely office worker who had not touched a paintbrush in 15 years. Ordinary people with ordinary lives. Amara loved every minute of it. For the first time in years, her evenings belonged to her. She cooked simple meals, walked through the neighborhood, sat by the window with coffee and sketchbooks while the city lights flickered below. But healing was not simple. Some nights, she still reached for her phone, expecting a message from Jinwoo. Some mornings, she woke up forgetting where she was. Grief does not disappear simply because you choose yourself. It lingers, it follows. It asks difficult questions. One rainy evening, Amara received a call from Mrs. Han, one of the longtime housekeepers at the mansion. Her voice was hesitant. "Madam, I should not be calling." Amara's fingers tightened around the phone. "What is it, Mrs.?" Han was quiet for a moment. "He keeps asking about you. That does not change anything." "I know." Another pause. "But I have worked in that house for 8 years. I have never seen him like this." After the call ended, Amara sat by the window for a long time. Part of her wanted to believe it mattered. Part of her wanted to believe he finally understood. But understanding loss was not the same as understanding love. Later that night, as she locked the studio, she noticed a black car parked across the street. It remained there for only a few seconds before pulling away into traffic. Maybe it meant nothing. Maybe it was coincidence, but deep inside, Amara knew better. For the first time since she walked away, she had the unmistakable feeling that Jinwoo Kang had stopped waiting for her to return and had started looking for her instead. The truth rarely arrives all at once. It arrives in fragments, receipts inside drawers, forgotten photographs, old notebooks, conversations nobody realized mattered until years later. Nearly a month after Amara left, Jinwoo stopped searching for explanations and started searching for answers. One Saturday morning, he entered the storage room beside his office looking for an old shipping contract. Instead, he found boxes Amara had packed years ago and never opened again. Inside were sketches, letters, studio plans, charity proposals, pieces of a life she had tried to build beside him. The first discovery was small, a folder containing records from a children's community center renovation. Jinwoo had always believed one of his directors handled the funding after the project nearly collapsed. But the receipts told a different story. Amara had paid nearly everything herself. Not for recognition, not for publicity, simply because children needed the place to stay open. Then came another file, and another, scholarship funds donated anonymously, medical bills paid for former employees, tuition assistance for the daughter of one of his drivers, rent covered for a widow whose husband had died in one of Kang Global Courier's warehouses. Every file revealed a version of Amara he had never bothered to see. For hours, Jinwoo sat alone in that storage room. No calls, no meetings, no orders, just silence. And the slow, unbearable realization that the woman he thought would always be there had been extraordinary in ways he never noticed. Meanwhile, Amara's studio was growing. Classes filled, students returned with friends. The walls filled with paintings from people rediscovering parts of themselves they thought were gone forever. Amara caught her reflection in the window and barely recognized herself. She stood straighter now, smiled more easily, laughed without forcing it. But every so often, memory found her. A favorite restaurant, a song from a passing car, the smell of Jinwoo's coffee. Healing was progress, not perfection. One evening, after a late class, Amara stepped outside to lock the studio. The air carried the first hint of winter. Streetlights glowed against wet pavement. Then she saw him across the street, Jinwoo. He was not hiding, not sitting in a black car, not surrounded by guards. He was simply standing there, alone. For a second, neither of them moved. He looked the same and different all at once. Dark coat, polished shoes, black hair tied loosely back, controlled posture, but his expression had changed. The certainty was gone, the distance was gone. For the first time since Amara had known him, Jinwoo Kang looked uncertain, human. He did not cross the street. He did not call her name. He simply stood there, holding a worn notebook in one hand. Amara recognized it, one of hers. A notebook filled with dreams she had written years earlier and forgotten. Dreams he had never known existed. Traffic passed between them. When the road cleared again, Jinwoo was still there, looking at her as though he had discovered something priceless, only after nearly losing it forever. Some people think the hardest part of leaving is walking away. They are wrong. The hardest part is discovering you can be happy after you do. For nearly 6 weeks, Amara built a life that no longer revolved around Jinwoo Kang. Her mornings belonged to the studio. Her afternoons belonged to students, paint, laughter, and plans. Her evenings belonged to quiet dinners, sketchbooks, and peace. That was why seeing him unsettled her. Not because she still needed him, because she no longer did. A week later, the bell above the studio door chimed. Amara looked up from arranging canvases and froze. Jinwoo stood inside the entrance. No guards. No assistants, no phone in his hand. Several students worked quietly at tables nearby, unaware of the history standing between them. "Hello, Amara," he said softly. Hearing her name in his voice after all this time felt strange. Familiar and unfamiliar at once. "Hello, Jinwoo." His eyes moved around the studio, the paintings, the shelves, the students laughing near the back. Everything she had built without him. "It is beautiful," he said. "Thank you." Silence settled between them. Then he held out the notebook. "I found this." Amara accepted it carefully. The worn cover felt familiar beneath her fingertips. "I forgot I even owned it. I read it," Jinwoo said, his voice lowered. Every page. Years ago, Amara would have given anything for him to care about those dreams. Now she simply listened. "You wanted this place long before you met me," he continued. "You wrote about helping people create things they thought they had lost." His gaze shifted toward the students. "You did it." There was no jealousy in his voice, no resentment, only admiration. Somehow that hurt more than anger ever could have. "I am happy here," Amara said quietly. The words hung between them, a truth, a boundary, a warning. Jinwoo nodded slowly. "I know." For the first time, Amara saw real pain in his eyes, not because she had left, because he finally understood what he had failed to protect. They talked for nearly 20 minutes. About the studio, the neighborhood, the students, ordinary things. But beneath every sentence lived the conversation neither of them was ready to have. Eventually, Jinwoo stepped toward the door. "I should go." Amara nodded. "Take care of yourself, Jinwoo." His hand rested briefly on the handle, then he looked back. "Amara," she met his eyes. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I finally understand what I lost." Then he walked out into the fading afternoon light, leaving Amara standing in the studio she had built for herself, wondering whether understanding had arrived too late, or whether, for the first time, it had arrived exactly when it needed to. The funny thing about second chances is that they rarely look the way people imagine. Months passed after Jinwoo visited the studio. Winter arrived in Seoul, wrapping the city in cold winds and silver skies. Life continued moving forward, but not in the direction either of them expected. Amara expanded the studio into the empty space next door. New classes opened. Local papers wrote about her community programs. Children painted murals. Women who had survived difficult marriages came to her evening workshops. Young artists found confidence inside rooms filled with light. For the first time in her adult life, Amara felt completely present in her own future. Jinwoo never interrupted that. He never asked her to return, never offered to buy the building, never tried to solve her problems with money, never used power to force his way back into her life. Instead, he changed quietly. Sometimes a handwritten note arrived after a successful exhibition. Sometimes an anonymous donation appeared in the studio's scholarship account. Sometimes mutual friends mentioned that Jinwoo had started coming home earlier, canceling unnecessary meetings, and visiting the families of workers he once only knew by employee number. He was still powerful, still feared, still Jinwoo Kang, but something in him had shifted. One snowy evening in December, Amara hosted the studio's first major community exhibition. The rooms glowed with warm light, paintings covered the walls, music drifted softly through the space. Students stood proudly beside their work while guests moved from room to room. Outside, snow fell over Seoul. Amara was greeting visitors near the entrance when she saw Jinwoo across the room. He stood alone. No entourage, no phone, no armor, just the man. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he walked toward her. "Congratulations," he said. "You built something extraordinary." Amara smiled softly. "Thank you." Jinwoo looked around the room. "I used to think success was measured by power." His voice carried a quiet honesty she had never heard before. "Now, I think it is measured by how many lives become better because you were there." Amara studied him carefully. The transformation was subtle but undeniable. He was still strong, still dangerous, still impossible to ignore, but the walls were gone, the cold distance was gone. For the first time in years, she saw the man she once loved beneath everything else. "You have changed," she said. Jinwoo nodded. "Losing you forced me to." The old Jinwoo would have stopped there, letting the sentence sound noble. But this Jinwoo continued. "I am not asking you to come back," he said softly. "I am not asking for forgiveness tonight. I know I do not deserve it just because I finally understand." Amara's throat tightened. His eyes met hers. "I only needed you to know that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. And losing you became the lesson that finally taught me how to become a better man." For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Snow drifted outside the windows. Guests laughed softly behind them. Life continued all around them. Amara looked at the man in front of her. The man who once said life would go on without her. The man who had built an empire moving packages, secrets, money, and fear through the city. The man who had somehow failed to carry the one heart that mattered most. And then, slowly, she reached for his hand, not because the past had disappeared. Not because the pain had never happened. Not because one apology could repair 3 years of loneliness. But because growth deserved to be recognized. Jinwoo looked down at their joined hands as though he could hardly believe it. Amara smiled faintly. "Maybe," she whispered, "this is where we start again." His eyes closed briefly. And for the first time in years, Amara saw gratitude instead of certainty. Outside, snow continued falling over the city. Inside, the woman who had once disappeared stood in the life she built for herself. And the man who thought life would go on without her finally understood the truth. Life did go on. But not the same life, not the same man, not the same woman. Because power built Jinwoo Kang's empire. But losing Amara taught him how to love. And sometimes, the quietest goodbye becomes the only thing strong enough to make a dangerous man kneel before his own heart.